You're back, the one they thought they finally cornered, the one they were certain would break this time. Let me tell you what I saw when they assembled that room, when they lined up their evidence piece by piece, when they synchronized their stories and practiced their delivery. Did you catch that look in their eyes? Did you see them convinced, absolutely convinced that this was the moment you'd finally crack, finally admit defeat, finally collapse and plead for forgiveness like they'd been dreaming about for so long? They constructed the perfect trap, didn't they? Every element calculated, every person positioned exactly right, every escape route sealed shut. They came prepared with proof, messages, exact timings, statements from people who claimed they witnessed everything, whatever it was they said you did. They even recruited the ones you once called friends, the ones who embraced you warmly while plotting behind closed doors. This wasn't merely an accusation. This was theater, a carefully staged event meant to destroy you, to tear you apart, to push you into a space where your only choice was complete surrender. But here's what broke their perfect plan. Here's the factor that demolished their entire strategy. You didn't break, you didn't stumble over words, you didn't frantically search for excuses or spiral into defensive explanations. No, you did something far more devastating. You remained completely calm. Not the anxious composure of someone guilty, not the manufactured ease of someone pretending, but the steady, unshakable presence of someone who just understood they're playing a completely different game than everyone else in the room. Because while they invested all their energy building this trap, you invested yours becoming someone who couldn't be trapped. While they collected testimonies, you became the only truth that carried weight. While they assembled their case, you transformed into living proof of something beyond their understanding. That certain people don't shatter under pressure, they become diamonds. And standing there in their meticulously prepared arena, you understood something profound, something freeing, something absolutely crushing to them. You were never the one being judged. They were. Let's examine this moment by moment and watch this unfold. Because what transpired in that space, what actually occurred, was nothing like their script. They believed they were revealing your flaws, but they only revealed their own. They saw themselves as prosecutors, judge, executioners. They missed one essential truth. You stopped valuing their opinions long before this moment. Their entire trap rested on a single false premise. That you still needed their approval, that you still wanted their acceptance, that their verdict still mattered in your reality. But you'd already released that version of yourself, the one that required validation from people who couldn't validate themselves. You'd already let go of the part that recoiled when they became aggressive, that apologized for things you never did, that diminished itself to accommodate their insecurities. What stood before them wasn't the person they remembered. It was the transformation, the evolution, the refined version that had absorbed every betrayal as information and emerged with a completely new perspective they couldn't manipulate. They presented witnesses. Interesting choice. Witnesses to what precisely? To your growth, to your peace, to how you removed yourself from their chaos without a backward glance. Every individual they pulled into that room to speak against you simply proved you'd transcended an entire circle of limited thinking. These weren't witnesses, these were admissions of their inadequacy, their envy, their frantic attempts to pull you back to a level where they could compete with you. And while they spoke, while they delivered their prepared complaints one after another, you observed something remarkable happen. You watched their stories contradict. You watched their narratives collapse under the pressure of their own lies. You watched the certain ones begin to doubt themselves. The hostile ones begin to overcompensate. The silent ones begin to wish they'd stayed home. Because this is what happens when you assemble dishonest people in one space. They cannot maintain consistent fiction. Truth carries a resonance, and lies, no matter how rehearsed, eventually create interference. But you didn't need to expose that, did you? You didn't need to mount a defense, didn't need to debate, didn't need to offer contradicting evidence. You simply existed in your reality, and that reality was so concrete, so immovable, so undeniably authentic that their fabrications revealed themselves for what they were. Pathetic attempts to rewrite what happened by people who couldn't confront their own actions. They arrived to condemn you and instead exposed their manipulation, their schemes, their months of fixation on someone who'd completely forgotten about them. The most amusing part, the detail that still haunts them, is that you never requested this confrontation. You never asked for a trial. You never needed vindication because your truth was already clear to you. They demanded your presence, orchestrated this drama, dragged you into their manufactured crisis because they couldn't tolerate your peace. They couldn't handle your growth. They couldn't accept that you'd evolved while they remained frozen, reliving old conflicts, rewriting old narratives, desperately trying to cast you as the enemy in a story you'd stopped engaging with. So you appeared, not out of obligation, but from curiosity, curious about their limits, curious to watch them expose themselves, curious to witness the instant they recognized they'd organized a trial where they were the only guilty parties, and that moment, that perfect, devastating instant when understanding hit them, when the atmosphere shifted completely, when their certainty fractured and your composure remained absolute. That's when they knew. They didn't trap you, they trapped themselves. Now, let's examine what followed that realization. After silence filled the room, after their charges floated in the air like smoke without flame, you could have annihilated them right then, couldn't you? You could have presented your evidence, your documentation, your testimony that would have destroyed every person present. You could have revealed the conversations they'd forgotten, the deceptions they told, the actions they took when they assumed nobody noticed. But you chose differently, and that choice terrified them more than anything. You didn't need victory because you'd never joined their contest. You didn't need to unmask them because their presence accomplished that already. You didn't need retribution because you'd already claimed something far more precious, your complete liberation from caring about their version of events. They expected warfare, and you offered stillness, the type of stillness that resonates louder than shouting, the kind that makes guilty minds begin admitting to things nobody even mentioned yet. They began retreating then, didn't they? The certain ones became diplomatic, the hostile ones became sympathetic, the prosecutors became peacemakers. We simply wanted conversation. We're concerned for you. This isn't about choosing sides. Deception layered upon deception, each more transparent than before. But you recognized it because you'd mastered their tactics. You understood manipulation fluently now, could detect gaslighting instantly, could recognize projection before they completed their thoughts. And as they rushed to reframe everything, to transform this from execution to intervention, you watched them embody precisely what they accused you of being. They labeled you manipulative while distorting reality in real time. They called you heartless while displaying zero compassion for the person they just attempted to publicly obliterate. They accused you of selfishness while centering everything on their emotions, their suffering, their interpretation. The contradiction was overwhelming, sharp, and bitter, like blood surrounding predators who just discovered they're not the hunters. Here's what they fundamentally misunderstood about traps. They only function when the target is scared. But you'd endured such intense trials by this point that their elaborate setup appeared trivial. You'd survived betrayals that would have destroyed their entire worldview. You'd reconstructed yourself from nothing while they debated who caused the destruction. You'd evolved into something completely outside their experience, someone who released their former self and emerged as something unrecognizable, unreachable, indestructible. So when they brought testimonies, you brought your history, and history doesn't deceive. When they brought accusations, you brought your stillness, and stillness doesn't waver. When they brought their trap, you brought your authenticity. And authenticity needs no defense. It simply exists, solid, unchangeable, infinite. Against that authenticity, their elaborate case appeared exactly as it was, fragile construction by people who'd forgotten how to build anything genuine. The instant they grasped this, when it truly registered that you wouldn't participate in their performance, wouldn't provide the response they craved, wouldn't break or surrender or justify, that's when everything collapsed. But it didn't collapse on you. It collapsed on them. They'd assembled everyone to observe your destruction and instead created spectators to their own obsession. They'd constructed a platform for your shame and ended up showcasing their own desperation. Every witness they recruited became proof of their fixation on you. Every charge they filed became documentation of how much mental space you consumed in their lives without paying rent. Every attempt to diminish you only emphasized how enormous you'd become in their internal landscape. They couldn't stop discussing you, couldn't stop obsessing over you, couldn't stop attempting to force you back into their story. Because without you as their antagonist, they faced the terrifying reality that perhaps they were the antagonist all along. And you simply remained there, unmoved, steady, observing them disintegrate before your eyes. Not with pleasure, not with arrogance, but with something infinitely more potent, complete detachment, authentic, absolute, earned detachment. The variety that emerges from understanding these people, their perspectives, their assessments, their desperate grasping for significance, none of it has impact. None of it affects you. None of it penetrates the space where you truly exist now, that sanctuary of self you constructed while they planned this ambush. They wanted to assume authority, but they overlooked something fundamental about judgment. It only functions when the accused acknowledges the court's legitimacy, and you'd permanently stopped acknowledging their authority over anything in your existence. You weren't facing trial in their courtroom. You were observing amateurs playing pretend, mimicking something they'd never comprehend. Real accountability, genuine transformation, authentic power. So here's what happened afterward. Here's the section they'll never acknowledge but can never erase. Gradually, they began departing. Not simultaneously. That would have been too transparent. But in that awkward, slow manner people exit when they comprehend they've made a catastrophic error. The testimonies ceased. The accusations stopped. The confident ones discovered urgent reasons to check messages, and you remained present, still peaceful, still grounded, still entirely unaffected by the turmoil surrounding you, because this is the result when you become sovereign in your own existence. You don't need to justify yourself to people unqualified to prosecute you. You don't need to explain yourself to people who've predetermined their perception regardless of reality. You don't need to win debates with people committed to misinterpreting you. You simply need to exist in your truth so powerfully that their lies cannot coexist with your presence. They constructed the trap and you move through it like an open door, not a dead end. They gathered witnesses and you transformed them into observers, reluctant students of what it means when someone genuinely doesn't require external approval. They attempted to corner you and discovered you'd been liberated all along, that their labyrinth had barriers only they perceived, that their cage had bars constructed from their limitations, not yours. Now, let's discuss the aftermath, because this is where everything becomes truly satisfying. They dispersed, returned to their routines, attempted to pretend that confrontation never occurred or didn't unfold as it obviously did. But something fundamental shifted, something permanent. They couldn't perceive you identically anymore. That version they'd constructed mentally, the fragile one, the guilty one, the one who'd eventually surrender and confirm their worldview, that version died in that room, replaced by the reality of your actual self. And what remained was something that disturbed them. Someone who'd encountered their coordinated assault and didn't merely survive but appeared completely unscathed. Someone who'd entered their trap and emerged cleaner than when they arrived. Someone who'd absorbed all their attacks and simply smiled as if none of it was actual ammunition. Just noise from plastic weapons wielded by people playing games you'd outgrown. They began observing you differently afterward. Not with the assurance of people who understand your vulnerabilities, but with the anxiety of people who just realized they never understood you at all. Every action you took became incomprehensible to them. Every achievement you reached became evidence of their failure to destroy you. Every moment of tranquility you displayed became a reflection showing them their own disorder. You became living, breathing proof that their narrative was fantasy, and fantasy cannot withstand contact with truth. Some attempted reconciliation later, didn't they? Careful messages, casual communications, efforts to reconstruct connections they destroyed while holding the flames. But you recognize that manipulation too. This wasn't genuine regret. This was panic. Panic that you'd share your perspective. Panic that you'd reveal what actually transpired in that room. Panic that their image, built on lies and sustained through manipulation, would crumble if you chose to speak. But here's the magnificent part. You didn't need to speak. Your silence carried more weight than any statement could. Your ongoing success testified louder than any accusation. Your peace damaged their narrative more than any defense you could construct. You didn't need retaliation because you'd already won the only war that mattered, the war for your consciousness, your reality, your liberation from their poisonous influence. They attempted to manipulate you, or at least they tried. They believed they were expert strategists, brilliant tacticians, masters of social warfare. They thought they'd analyzed your behaviors, anticipated your reactions, prepared for every conceivable outcome. What they couldn't prepare for was the possibility that you'd transcended their entire framework, that you'd evolved beyond needing their validation, their approval, their acceptance. And that's when the true reversal occurred. That's when the manipulators got manipulated. Because while they obsessed over traps and testimonies and cases, you focused on constructing yourself. While they fixated on destroying you, you were ascending to elevations they couldn't imagine. While they plotted your collapse, you were already standing at the peak, observing them struggle far below. They believed they were manipulating you, but every action they took simply revealed more about themselves. Every trap they designed showed their desperation. Every witness they presented demonstrated their need for group validation. Every accusation they launched exposed their own projection. They weren't manipulating you. They were manipulating themselves, performing a tragedy where they played both villain and victim. And you were simply the mirror reflecting the truth they couldn't accept. Now they exist with that knowledge, that understanding that they committed everything to a hand they thought was unbeatable, and you weren't even at the table. They risked their credibility, their relationships, their inner peace on destroying you. And all they destroyed was their illusion of having power over you. They summoned you to their court and discovered you'd been operating under different laws entirely, one where their rules were irrelevant, their judgments carried no weight, their sentences meant absolutely nothing. And the witnesses they recruited, the ones who promised to testify against you, some of them perceive you differently now as well. They watched you stand in that intensity and remain untouched. They witnessed you face that coordinated attack and stay composed. They observed you handle their absolute worst with grace beyond their comprehension. And now, quietly, some question if they chose the wrong side, if they were manipulated as pieces in someone else's revenge, if they participated in something that revealed more about the accusers than the accused. But you don't require their realization, their remorse, their delayed comprehension. You never did. That's what they still cannot grasp. You weren't waiting for them to recognize truth. You weren't hoping they'd eventually understand. You'd already progressed forward, already released them from the space they held in your thoughts, already forgiven them, not because they earned it, but because you deserved freedom.